Greetings everyone, this is Judge Schlackman. In this video presentation I will be continuing on a topic from my previous video which covers the issue of psychopaths, spiritual catalysts, and the law of attraction. In that part 1 I went into some of the basic ideas and concepts related to how the psychopathic personality would tend to develop, how it would function in relationships with others, in particular relationships with people who are playing the role of the codependent, the person who in a sense is allowing themselves to be manipulated or abused, not necessarily consciously wanting to be abused, but so attached to that relationship, to that particular role that they're playing, that they can't bring themselves to break free, to choose to be independent or separate from that relationship. There are many complex issues here for us to explore, since our personality structure or character structure is something that develops from the time we're an infant, really, and going through different stages of our development. It's often been said that when someone has a major stress or trauma at a certain stage and they're not able to mature to make it past that stage, they have arrested development. And even though they have that arrested development in one aspect of their personality, other aspects of that person may appear to have matured further. So it could be described as a person having a certain subpersonality that is still stuck at that earlier stage, that hasn't been integrated, that hasn't reached the adulthood stage yet. Now, as human beings, we do have influences from other lifetimes, so we may carry with us into our current life certain characteristics, certain patterns, certain traits that we had in another lifetime. We may carry with us unresolved traumas from other lifetimes. In fact, from the perspective of the soul, that would be a useful thing to manifest, to have something that's unresolved in one lifetime re-emerge or recreate in another lifetime, to give a new opportunity to heal that particular issue. It's the law of attraction in that sense, but carried beyond one particular lifetime. So the vibrational pattern or issue that that person carries that's attracting certain types of experiences and relationships has been developed in another time, in another incarnation, and it's being expressed in this current incarnation. Now, this happens with experiences in our present lifetime, of course, things that happen in our childhood, and the emotions and beliefs that we're holding on to from that time are, of course, influencing how the rest of our life proceeds. In healing work, we often use methods that help us, in a sense, deconstruct how our personality, how our psyche has developed, so that we can kind of realign it or recreate it in a newer, healthier way. Often we developed patterns or characteristics that were solutions or coping mechanisms for what happened in our life at a particular time or a particular situation or circumstance. Those happened at a time when we weren't able to consciously recognize that it wasn't really valuable or productive to apply that coping strategy to our life as a whole. we just made it sort of our core personality rather than just using it as a limited tool, as something to apply in a particular situation or environment, but not something to overgeneralize to express in every particular circumstance or situation that we might encounter. As we go through those different stages in our life where we develop those coping strategies, those defensive patterns or mechanisms for dealing with a stressful situation, something that is unpleasant or traumatic, we do often tend to overgeneralize that and make it our default program for how we respond to life, especially when this occurs at a very young age, when we're not able to be more conscious of different ways that we could handle things. When we've developed those particular patterns, it becomes what some people would consider your core personality. And with our personality types, each one has its certain strengths or weaknesses. Each basic archetypal personality type can be, to a more or less extent, out of balance. We can go to one extreme or another extreme rather than being able to use our resources in an efficient or functional way. They start to be applied in a dysfunctional way. Something that might be valuable in one particular situation can be very dysfunctional, very counterproductive in other situations. Now, the field of psychology tends to look in terms of pathology when it examines personalities. So that means it's looking to see how a personality will tend to produce dysfunctional behaviors. Yet those dysfunctional behaviors are actually functional from the perspective of that individual who created that personality. At least they seemed functional at the origin point, at the source. So in the first time that particular strategy was applied, in some way it must have seemed to work or be functional for that person, for them to continue with that particular approach to responding to the world around them, for interacting with their social environment. In the metaphysical healing traditions and energetic healing traditions, the idea of these different personality structures has been something that's been very important. And those who do spiritual healing work will often examine these types, these personality characteristics, and help people learn to rebuild their personality in a healthier way, in a way that's more balanced and that's no longer very reactive, no longer based upon how someone handled trauma in the past. One particular modality or form of healing that has looked into these personality structures a lot is the Barbara Brennan healing system. And Barbara Brennan is a clairvoyant healer, and she developed this particular system of hands-on healing based on her observations and experiences doing this type of energetic and spiritual healing work. She also studied other bioenergetic types of healing systems and information, and in her books she does discuss these basic personality types or archetypal personality structures and how they would look energetically, and also how they would be exhibited in human relationships and interactions. Brennan wrote two very popular books. One is called Hands of Light, and the other book is Light Emerging. In that second book, she really goes into depth about these personality characteristics and structures. One of those basic archetypal personality structures or personality types that she explores and addresses is the psychopathic structure. And I'm going to read from that book now some of the information in her chart that looks at this as well as the other personality types or personality defense mechanisms that are important to understand when we're engaged in healing work. According to Brennan's material, the psychopathic personality type, their main issue is betrayal. Now, if we go back to this idea of how people as a child are responding to trauma, to mistreatment by their parents, we have to recognize that as a young child, your parents, in a sense, are like gods to you. You innately or intrinsically look up to them. You expect them to take care of you, to nurture you, to attend to your needs and well-being. And if they don't do that, whether it's through some form of abuse or neglect, then your parents have betrayed you. And you naturally will have an emotional feeling related to that betrayal. Now, according to the Brennan material, the fear that the psychopathic person has is they're afraid to let go and to trust. Now, if you're afraid to let go and trust others, then you're going to want to be in control. And that's where we see these people becoming very manipulative, very abusive and controlling toward others. Now, in their particular personal history, because they were betrayed, because their parents or caretakers did not respond to their basic needs, particularly their emotional needs, then they have, in this particular situation, a legitimate reason not to trust, because those people who they depend upon were not trustworthy, were not playing the role of a parent that a child feels that the parent should play. So what they experienced was that they were used and betrayed. That's the description that Brennan gives in her book. And there are different ways or forms that use or abuse, that betrayal can occur. So it won't necessarily be the exact same way for each person. Now, if we bring this energetic science down to the physical level, we can understand that trauma, these different stresses actually affect the way our brain develops, the pathways that form in the brain, the parts, the structures of the brain that are activated. So there would actually be observable physical differences in brain structure and brain activity between a person who has a more healthy environment when they're growing up and a person who has this very abusive or very neglectful environment when they're a child. For people that are very profoundly psychopathic, who truly seem to have no emotional relation to others, no compassion, no empathy, and don't seem to be capable of it, it's often found that there's some form of abnormality or damage in their brain. Whether this is something that was programmed into them before birth, or something that happened as some type of injury as a child, or their imprint upon their own brain based upon the trauma that occurred, that's somewhat of an open question. It may vary depending upon each case. We do, however, need to recognize that physical damage done to the brain can create what appears to be a psychopathic personality. There are some groups or cults, let's say, that intentionally program people to behave in a psychopathic manner. They may program people from the time they're a child to act without conscience, without empathy for others. From their point of view, this might be useful in terms of creating someone who is a soldier, someone who has to carry out some type of challenging task or role, something that seemingly or supposedly normal people would not want to do, something that people with natural human compassion would try to avoid or resist. But if you were to program a person at a young age to not have that empathy or compassion, then it would be easier to direct them to carry out inhumane activities to do harm to others. If we look at some of the types of people that carry out mass shootings or bombings or things that harm a lot of other people, we could consider the possibility that at least some of those individuals have received some type of programming that pushes them at least momentarily into that type of mental state where they're carrying out their action without any feeling or compassion. Coming back to this chart, this outline of the personality structures, we talked about what that person who's psychopathic experienced. Now we're going to talk about what their defensive action is. So what is their coping strategy here? Well, the psychopathic person, their defensive action is to control others. They had no power or control over that parental figure who mistreated them. So now they're attempting to establish control themselves to be in control over other people. The results of that defensive action are aggression and betrayal drawn to the self. So they're carrying out aggression toward another person, and they're betraying another person. So they've, in a sense, taken on the role of the abuser, rather than taking on the role of the victim, which other people who have been mistreated may do. The person who develops this personality strategy is recapitulating this abuser role. Now, the relationship of this person to their core essence would be that they're afraid that the essence is bad or evil. That's the way that Barbara Brennan describes this. And their human need is to be able to trust others to make mistakes and to still be safe. Their spiritual need is to recognize and honor their core essence and the higher will of others. And finally, Brennan refers to something called time distortion and how that's reflected in each of the personality characteristics. And she says that the psychopathic person would tend to rush into the future. So they're very future-oriented. They're looking to accomplish and achieve things, and it's not easy for them to just relax, to just be patient. Now, that's just one of the different potential ways that a personality can develop in an imbalanced way. One potential of how it can learn to defend itself from its core wounding. As I mentioned in the first part of this presentation about psychopaths, the person who tends to be codependent, the person who tends to sacrifice themselves, that person has developed that seemingly opposite mechanism whereby rather than hurting others, they're actually afraid to hurt others. They're preoccupied with tuning into and attending to the needs of someone else in this subconscious hope or desire that that other person will at some point really start to care for them. In the long run, this strategy is not going to work. It's not going to make that psychopathic person suddenly start to become compassionate or empathetic. In fact, it may even further feed in to their psychopathic trait. It actually shows them that they are controlling you, they are successfully manipulating you, they have you wrapped around their finger, figuratively speaking, and so there's no reason for them to consider changing because this defense mechanism they developed is being effective for them in their relationship with you. Only when they discover that their defense mechanism, their coping strategy can no longer work, it's no longer able to achieve what they desire, would they be likely to start to work on changing or healing themselves in some manner. Now, one thing that I think everyone should recognize is that there are programs, there are social conditionings that may reinforce these different types of personality defenses that people have created for themselves. The psychopath may actually bring themselves into an environment where they are rewarded for that type of behavior. So if that person becomes a leader in a society where they're able to experience a reward for controlling other people, then they're going to really thrive in a sense in that role. Now, a person who is tending toward the self-sacrificing, the person who seeks to please others at all costs, including the cost to themselves, that person may have been conditioned to be, let's say, the nice person, the person who's a pacifist, the person who would never harm another person, even though by playing that role they're at the very least harming themselves. Often there are spiritual teachings that tend to reinforce that imbalanced understanding. One example of this is the Christian teaching that says to turn the other cheek. In the New Testament, there's a passage where it has Jesus stating that if someone slaps you in the face, rather than seeking an eye for an eye, you should just turn the other cheek to them for them to hit that one also if they want to. Or if someone sues you to take your shirt, to give them your coat also. In that passage, people often interpret it to mean that you should just allow people to do what they will, to harm and abuse you, and for you not to fight back, not to stand up for yourself, not to even break away from that situation. That, of course, is not a healthy approach. If we're in an abusive situation, if someone is violating our rights and we're denying ourselves, if we're just allowing them to take advantage of us, then we're perpetuating this whole dysfunctional pattern. If we are in that type of situation, we can realize it may not be healthy to be vengeful, to want to harm other people, but we do need to be able to assert and stand up for ourselves, to value our own well-being. Your well-being has to take precedence. If you're not healthy, if you're not able to live your life and to be fully alive here, how are you going to be able to fully help anyone else? Rather than being self-sacrificing, there are times where we need to really assert ourselves. Of course, any situation has to be looked at according to its own merits. There can be situations where we feel that it would be desirable to some extent to sacrifice our own needs to aid someone else, where we do have to make a choice between aiding someone else and taking care of what appears to be our own needs. Those situations do exist. However, we can't take something to an extreme where we're constantly denying ourselves, where we're constantly allowing other people to take advantage of us or manipulate us. I hope that this discussion is giving each of you some ideas and insights. As I mentioned in part 1 of this topic, the person who is the psychopath has so disconnected themselves from their feelings, from their original wound, that they usually don't conceive that they have something wrong with themselves. They believe that the way they function is truly healthy, and they may perceive people who are not like themselves as weaker. Therefore, they are not usually going to seek therapy. They're not going to look for counseling or healing help unless something really forces the issue upon them, unless they can no longer successfully use their defense mechanism and they are confronted with that deep pain, whatever anger, betrayal, whatever suffering they've carried within them. So at some point things may start to crack. Their shield may no longer hold, so to speak, and that pain may start to arise in them. Whereas most people who have some type of anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, most people who have psychological disturbances have feelings that are showing them that. So they're really suffering, they're aware of their suffering, and they are inclined at some point often to seek help. It's the psychopath who has the defense mechanism that disconnects them from that suffering, so they're not really aware that there's anything wrong that they need to seek help for. Another type, per se, another form of psychological disturbance that may not realize they need help is the person who is fully dissociative, someone who has what would be called multiple personality disorder. In that case, some of their personalities could be experiencing the pain or suffering, but others might not. And as long as they're able to make those switches between those personality alters, they may be able to avoid or escape confronting that pain. Now, for those that are interested in understanding more about this subject, I do encourage you to research it further. The Barbara Brennan book, Light Emerging, is one excellent resource for looking at these basic personality characteristics and how they play out in our lives and what issues each individual may need to work on to heal those core issues and to bring themselves toward a healthier, more balanced, more whole and integrated state. In the therapeutic work that I do often combine energy healing with some type of experiential, some type of hypnosis or regression form of therapy where the person is guided to review and re-access their past experiences, to reframe and reintegrate whatever has occurred there, so that they're no longer resisting or rejecting that experience, no longer identifying themselves as a victim, no longer holding on to whatever emotional energies may have been trapped at that time, and now able to use all of their adult, more mature and evolved resources to handle any situations that come up in their lives. So for the child and adult self to become integrated, so that one of them isn't popping up without the awareness of the other, or without the mature self being able to give some type of coherence to how they're responding to things. Each of us have some level of mistreatment that we've experienced, at least subjectively, even if things seem objectively okay in how you were treated. In some manner you might perceive it as a mistreatment. So it's really our subjective experience and interpretation. It's the meaning that we give to what we've encountered in our lives. With that understanding, we can see that two different people going through the same type of environment or the same type of experience may perceive that situation differently and may respond or cope with it in different ways. So we can't assume that just because a person had a particular objective experience that they subjectively processed it the same way. Therefore, as a therapist, it's important to really tune in and connect to your client and their perception of things, how they understand their life experience, not the understanding that you might project onto it based upon your worldview or your past experiences. I would like to acknowledge and thank each of you for taking your time to explore these topics of healing and personal growth. For anyone who would like to learn more, anyone who might be seeking individualized healing support and resources, you can visit my website at www.phinsights.com. That's PHINSIGHTS.com. Namaste.